It is July 1863, and the United States has been invaded. Confederate forces have crossed the border into Pennsylvania. The United States Army is in hot pursuit, but neither army really knows where the other is until they stumble into each other in the small town of Gettysburg. Now, Gettysburg is just beyond those hills right out there. That's where the town lies. And on the first day of the battle, the Confederates actually pushed the Union Army out and took the town. But then the Union Army began to take positions on the heights stretching out south of town, while the Confederates started taking positions along this ridge off in the distance. And these armies were so massive that their lines extended for 2 miles south of the town. They didn't know it then, but they were about to participate in the biggest battle of the Civil War, the biggest battle in United States history. When you look at the map of the battle, you can see just how far down the Union and Confederate lines stretched from the town, facing each other for the second day of the battle, July 2nd, 1863. And as you can see, this hill that we're standing on, Little Round Top, is almost like a fortress. It has a commanding view over the battlefield, a dominating view over what was the Union line. So off here in this clearing in the middle distance, you could see the center of the Union lines. If you had cannons up here, you could see right over them. It's a pretty key position on the battlefield, and General George Gordon Meade, the commanding general of the United States forces here, had instructed one of his subordinate generals, Dan Sickles, to secure this hill by putting his line down here in front of it. Unfortunately, Sickles did not obey, and so there were no Union troops up on this hill during the battle, which resulted in some of the craziest fighting in the entire Battle of Gettysburg. Throughout all the fields and peach orchards and rocky valleys below us, also in the woods back over here on the flank of Little Round Top, commanding these heights was going to be key to winning the battle on that second day. Little Round Top and the fight for it is prominently featured in the 1993 movie Gettysburg. I've been up here, I've filmed a video about Little Round Top and also about the third day of the battle where the Confederates were finally defeated and pushed back. I've been here many times before, but one place I have never been on the Gettysburg battlefield is down below Little Round Top, where some of the most fierce fighting took place beyond the Valley of Death that you see in front of you over there in a place called Devil's Den. The reason I've never gone down there is I've always found the Devil's Den part of the battle very confusing, very murky. And so today I've actually arranged to meet with an expert on Devil's Den, my favorite Civil War historian, a guy I first met just by running into him here at Gettysburg a few years ago, Garry Adelman. Now, Garry Adelman is a licensed battlefield guide here at Gettysburg. He's a historian and author, works with the American Battlefield Trust to preserve parts of the battlefield that aren't owned by the National Park Service. Easily one of the most popular Civil War historians on the internet. He's appeared in all kinds of documentaries. It is a very rare treat to get a personal tour of any part of the battlefield from Garry Adelman. He's in high demand, but now we are going to descend the slopes of Little Round Top and go down into the Devil's Den and meet up with Garry. All right, I've descended the hill and I'm here with Garry Adelman. Garry, I tried to explain who you were. You're better at it.
I am chief historian at the American Battlefield Trust. I'm absolutely obsessed with American history, namely the Civil War, and namely Gettysburg, and namely Civil War photography. I'm also vice president of the Center for Civil War Photography and a licensed battlefield guide here at Gettysburg for 31 years.
This is awesome. And this is your favorite place on earth. We've come down to Devil's Den. Now, I know very little about Devil's Den, and assuming I know nothing, what do we need to know?
Okay, so we're about 2.5 miles south of Gettysburg. Gettysburg would be off in that direction. Gettysburg's a town of 7,000 or 8,000 people now. It was 2,400 people during the battle, okay? Small farming community, but up and coming. You know, we're talking about multiple churches, banks, gas lighting. The railroad had come to town, so it's up and coming. And by the way, Los Angeles, from where I think our host sort of hails, had 4,000 people in 1860. Gettysburg had 2,400, so there's some real potential here. Maybe not a fair comparison. In any case, we're south of that town a couple of miles, and we're sort of like standing on a boulder because we're at the edge of a sill called the Gettysburg Sill that happens to run diagonally through this part of Pennsylvania. And that means that there's rocks here, there's rocks on a then unnamed hill now called Little Round Top, one of the most famous Civil War places of all. And Little Round Top is important because it forms the end of what we call the Union fish hook, okay? The Union Army George Gordon Meade, 90,000 soldiers or so are going to form this way on the second day of the battle. Look, I brought my own fishhook with me, okay? And it's supposed to end here on Little Round Top, okay? It is going to go up to other famous places like Cemetery Ridge, Cemetery Hill, and Culp's Hill, the ends of which have rocks on them because of the sill.
Right.
Okay. And for 2 days, July 2nd and 3rd, 1863, some of the bloodiest combat in American history. We're talking about 21,000 casualties on the 2nd, 13,000 casualties on the 3rd, and these are back-to-back after the first day where there were 17,000 casualties or more. So we're talking about some heaviest combat that make up the bloodiest battle ever fought in American history. Now, because this is Little Round Top over here,
Which
anybody
is that hill there.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you're going to go up there and get some B-roll from up there. In fact, I see some blinking lights up there. Maybe somebody's taking pictures of us. You know, it's a great view from there, much better than you think. And it would have been a great place to hold. But the commander in that area, 10,000 soldiers, under the command of a guy
Little
named...
Round Top is here at the tip of the fishhook.
Correct.
The town is basically up here.
Yeah.
So that's 2.5 miles of soldiers. How many Union soldiers in that line?
85,000 by that time or something like that.
And you don't want to break or a gap in that line. It's very important to have a solid line.
Correct. The Union line has, say, 85,000 soldiers on this line here, and that allowed their commander, Meade, to shift troops back and forth easily, and he would. The Confederates, if they need to get a guy from one side to the other, they have to go 6 miles, not 1 or 2. Okay,
right.
They have to go all the way like this. Lee's army, Robert E. Lee, the Confederate commander, you're talking about 65, 70,000 soldiers by that time, are on a longer line with fewer men, and that means they never have the reinforcements they need. And in the end, this whole fight at famous places near here, Devil's Den, where we stand, Little Round Top, the wheat field, and Peach Orchard, 15,900 Confederates will attack them, and 41,000 Union soldiers will oppose them. Everywhere the Confederates go, they are facing 2.5 times their number. And in Civil War combat, in any combat, that's not a good thing.
And they have the more concentrated line, so they not only do they have more soldiers, but they are more tightly packed together.
Yes. 2 more things. They're also on the defensive, which is great.
Yep.
It's actually 3 more things. They're on the defenses, which is an advantage. They have the high ground, which is an advantage. And finally, the Union has, for the first time in a major battle, the home field advantage. The true battle fought furthest to the north, and in sports or war, that is really important. So, you know, you've got this guy, Dan Sickles. Okay, he's in command of 10,000 soldiers over here. Do you know, Justin, how we usually pronounce Sickles' name? Have you heard us? Sickles. Because Sickles is what we call a political general. This dude didn't go to West Point, didn't have any military training.
I was going to ask you. He was a politician. He wasn't a soldier.
Yeah. Brave enough guy, though. Most famous before the Civil War for a little incident, you know, shot and kills his wife's lover in front of the White House.
Right, who was the son of Francis Scott Key, who wrote the national anthem, right?
Yes.
We just saw that flag yesterday.
Yeah, good. And first of all, you know, good chops to Justin for knowing that, by the way. So Sickles was a brave enough guy, and he would have known Little Round Top is important. But the ground to the north of Little Round Top, it's low, it's wooded. And he was afraid, and one of the good reasons to come to a battlefield is that we can see the hill and see the intervening wood lines that he was scared of. He was concerned that the Confederates could get to that wood line, then that wood line, and they would be within 300 yards of him before he could even use his artillery. He didn't like that low ground there. So eventually, without any orders, he decides, without specific orders, to push his men away from Little Round Top and out to the Peach Orchard. That's the point here, where he could use his artillery better. That line, he doesn't have enough men to man it. He's going to be attenuated, stretched out along the Emmitsburg Road, and then bending back to this pile of rocks here, my favorite place in the whole world, Devil's Den. Okay, so instead of being on Little Round Top, Dan Sickles has come out in front of it. And to his credit, right, he thinks he has Little Round Top covered because he's right out in front of it, except his line ends there. Where do we now know the Confederates come from? A larger hill called Big Round Top. So the story people tell, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but the Confederates are going to rest on Big Round Top for 5 minutes. They're going to go down the other side, and then they're going to occupy Little Round Top because there's nobody really up there.
So they can get behind the Union
lines. And they can get behind the Union line. They're going to win the Battle of Gettysburg, and we live in a much better place. I'm sorry. God, that was a big mistake. We live in a much different place today. I don't know if I can get
better for
Justin
the Confederates.
To edit that out. I'm from Illinois here. I can't believe I'm saying that. So we're going to live in a much different place today because the Confederate flag is planted on Little Round Top at Gettysburg and on the moon.
And then they could shoot. Then they'd be able to fire artillery all down that 2 miles of Union line.
Yeah, they can get into the Union rear, capture the Union trains, scare the largest army in the world into a costly retreat away from Gettysburg. But no, that's not going to happen. First of all, I don't think it would have anyway, but it wouldn't have because a guy who has a probably the most iconic Civil War statue up there named Gouverneur Kemble Warren. Warren, an engineer, knows topography and was not going to leave that hill unoccupied. And through his efforts, he's able to get Union soldiers over to that side of the hill, on the south side of the hill, 5 minutes before the Southerners descend that hill and try to attack it. And that sets up the famous moment, the attack and defense of Little Round Top.
Which is a big part of the Gettysburg movie. That's the part that stuck in my mind the most from seeing that movie and learning in junior high and stuff like that.
It plays out in real time. Now, the Little Round Top in the movie was filmed a few miles away, but they did film some of the big Round Top scenes in the movie on Little Round Top. They had to cover up the monuments with brush and things like that.
Cool.
Super cool. Now, just real quick, that fight that produces 1,200 casualties is happening at the same time as this fight that produces 1,800 casualties, casualties being killed, wounded, captured, and missing.
So actually more people were casualties here than on the famous fight on the side of Little Round Top.
Correct.
But this is also sort of a fight for Little Round Top, right? Because the Confederates are coming from this way.
Correct. So if you look off in the distance above that car that just went, or SUV, the most distant tree line you see is Seminary or Warfield Ridge. That's the Confederate outer line here.
Right.
And the guys on the far right there had to march the longest to get here. They're Alabamians assisted by Texans, Georgians, and Arkansans. And they're going to launch a general assault in this area, some of whom go up Big Round Top toward Little Round Top, and many of whom attack Devil's Den, both head on, where that tree is, and through this gully here called the Slaughter Pen.
The Slaughter Pen. So the Slaughter Pen is this here in front of Devil's Den, well, between Devil's Den and Little Round Top, okay.
Correct. So a few other features here. Devil's Den, and maybe we'll talk more about what Devil's Den actually is.
Yes,
but people come to these rocks, they see a sign and they figure, okay, I've been to Devil's Den. These are the rocks of Devil's Den. And yes, they were here during the battle. Guides get all sorts of good questions. Were these rocks here in the battle? Yes. Where do they put the monuments in the winter? They don't. Why didn't they hide behind the monuments? Are there bullet holes in the monuments? Why are all battles fought in national parks? So you do get them all as a tour guide for sure. But, you have all these stories of this place. So if you're game, man, let's check more of it out.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, let's go over there. Before we say anything else, I should mention that you have a lot of different jobs. You've got the Garry Adelman's Civil War page on Facebook. You're doing work with the American Battlefield Trust. You are still a licensed battlefield guide. You have to be licensed to give tours at all on the battlefield, but you don't do this on a daily basis. So we're getting a special treat here.
Yeah, one of the good things, and Justin knows this as a super famous personality, your life changes. Video changes your life, mostly in good ways. But in other ways, nobody's everybody's cup of tea.
Right.
But it does make you busier, and it's come to the point where I have the best full-time job in the world at the American Battlefield Trust, and we, almost like my personal Garry Adelman Civil War page, and the tours I give are all basically quasi or fully American Battlefield Trust things, and that takes up all my time.
And they're all online now because you're too in demand to usually go on the ground with lots of groups or to be hired by groups. So I just want to emphasize we're getting a special treat here, and we really appreciate it. Okay.
I am unbookable.
And you have written many books about this, by the way, too. So you're the expert here. Okay, so now I'm going to shut up and we're going to listen to what the expert has to say.
Having dispensed with all that stuff, let's talk about this. So I mentioned at the outset that I'm obsessed with Civil War photography, specifically at Gettysburg, but at all places. And one thing that's convenient for Gettysburg is not only did a northern photographer, most Civil War photos were taken by northern photographers, and they could only access battlefields where the Union won, which didn't happen a whole lot in the early parts of the war. Most of these photos are taken in the east. So then you have this sort of disparity of photos. But in any case, they got here to Gettysburg in time before all the dead were buried. And the dead who weren't buried were largely Confederate soldiers, okay? And while there are photos taken here at Devil's Den, because we have rocks, that allowed a historian, William Frazanito, long ago to divine the locations of these photos, we know where the dead lay, there, up there, along that way, in those woods over there.
Unlike the middle of a field or something, it's impossible to line up.
Correct.
You have all these.
The rocks don't change at all. And let's show this. Even amidst all these dead, there was a sketch artist here named Alfred Wad, okay? Wad is up here, and he's apparently friends with the photographer Alexander Gardner. And Wad sat on this rock right here. And he didn't only sit here, he put up one knee, he put a sketch pad right here, and he didn't look at the camera, he looked toward Little Round Top, and then he took his eyeballs and moved them up the Valley of Death. Now, if we're doing this about right, there should be a crack in the boulders like right over my head there.
Yep.
And this is one thing that, I might call time travel. Here we are on a battlefield sitting in 3D, and time is passing over this place. Let's challenge Justin to edit this thing properly so it looked like a perfect then and now, like a movie scene, but a real one.
That's my favorite thing to do at Disneyland or at Gettysburg. You're the master of that at Gettysburg.
Well, and I learned it from William A. Frazanito, without whom I would never live here. I wouldn't be on this video. My kids would not exist. But I'd have never met my wife on the town square.
That's amazing.
Were it not for him. So what we're doing is sort of crossing the main rocks of Devil's Den. These are volcanic boulders. They are not glacial. They're much older. 201.2 million years old is the best estimate of how old these are.
The fact that you even have knowledge of the rocks.
Hold on, wait, I'm much worse than that.
Okay.
The 3-day Battle of Gettysburg represents 1/29 trillionth the life of the rocks.
Okay, I like that.
Actually, you know what? Let's pause here for a second.
Sure.
Justin, I didn't even tell you this earlier, okay? We just walked by a sign that says Devil's Den on it. Let's walk over here.
Right.
So it says Devil's Den. This sign was put up in 1900. Big deal, okay? But there's a road behind you. You've already seen it. It was put in 1897, okay? This is interesting to me. You have to study a battlefield not only at the time, in 1863 in this case, but later as well. Let me explain why. In 1904, a guy named William Houghton came back here. He's a Confederate, he's a Georgian, and he came here, visited, and wrote back to his hometown newspaper and said, I went to Gettysburg. I'm not crazy about the fact that all the Confederate monuments are where the action isn't.
Yeah.
Confederates, you know, first of all, you don't rush to put up monuments where you lose.
Right.
You usually put them up where you won. In the South is where most Confederate monuments are or were. But by the way, any of them that are coming down, none of them have been removed from battlefields. The Confederate monuments you see being taken away and whatnot are in town squares and places where they lack the context of, say, a battlefield.
Right,
in any case, Houghton comes here and complains about the lack of Confederate monumentation near the fighting, and also said, I visited the spot where my regiment, the 2nd Georgia, actually fought. And he said, I looked up at the rocks where a line of blue-coated regulars were shooting directly down upon us. He said that I was charging with the gallant Muse and Sergeant Mays, and he said that while they were charging through this gully, that Muse fell to his left, striking his feet. And here's the good part. He said that the place where that happened is where the Government Avenue now runs over the place, just a few steps away from a sign that says Devil's Den on it.
Wow.
So stick with me, everybody, here at Randomland. Here you've got a guy who fought in the battle in 1863 and then came back in 1904 and uses an 1897 road and a 1900 sign to tell us in 2025 what happened in 1863. Wow. This is how research really pays off. Sometimes historians fill their brains with useless information, but in this case, I have learned that the 2nd Georgia was more in this direction than I would have expected. That's forced me to deal with that interpretation. And by the way, I checked the records, and a guy named Muse and a guy named Mays were shot in the head and killed at Gettysburg. So this guy's telling a pretty true account, at least in terms of essentials.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool stuff.
Okay, so I know the Confederates are coming from back here. That's where their main battle line is over here.
Correct.
They're coming across here. But when they start fighting at Devil's Den, is the Union up on top of these rocks? Are they behind the rocks? Where's the Union at the beginning of the Devil's Den fight?
So first of all, like this way that they fought seems a little insane. But trust me, the people of the past,
lines.
they didn't have a death wish. You know, they were using the most modern tactics they had available to them. And the Civil War failed to produce some magical way, you're thinking of it, to avoid frontal assaults sometimes.
Right.
We just blaze away at each other. I'll be glad on another video to get into this because we always think we're smarter than the past, just like our kids think they're smarter than us. We can't help it, okay? In any case, the Union is trying to array in lines, so they are facing the Confederates on top of these rocks on the other side, okay? But one of the commanders was concerned that the Confederates would simply come up through this gully now known as the Slaughter Pen, okay, which they did.
Which was my next question. Is that the way they got here?
So they convinced, they asked this regiment, this battery commander said, hey, men from Maine, the 4th Maine in this case, could you go and block the valley? And they're like, no, we like it up top, the high ground. So then the battery commander went to the brigade commander, regiments, brigades, division, corps, army.
Thank you.
Okay. So they went to the brigade commander, and the brigade commander ordered the 4th Maine to block the gully up here, okay?
Right.
So that when the Confederates showed up here, they're confronting a Maine force, but a lot more Confederates showed up than the Maine men actually had.
Gotcha.
Make sense?
So they were driven back up onto these rocks?
Well, actually, sort of like the Maine men had been down here, and then they, pull back and they see Confederates up above them, and that is not a cool place to be. So they pulled back, charged to the top, recaptured the crest, got help from some Pennsylvania soldiers, and captured the crest. But 1,300 more Confederates are stacked up under Henry L. Benning, after whom Fort Benning at least used to be named, at least for now. And they're going to come up and tip the scales for the Confederates, okay? So that's when Devil's Den is captured. That is when Little Round Top is really peaking in terms of intensity, where they could use more Confederate help, but none of the Confederates who fought here ultimately charged up Little Round Top.
Right, okay, so we're starting with Union troops here. The Confederates come and take this hill. The Union is trying to fight back. The Confederates take it in as hotly contested ground, all so that they can go up this way and flank the Union Army.
Yeah, man, and look, as she walks away, we have a Gettysburg celebrity there. That's Dr. Carol Reardon, who writes all about Gettysburg. Pickett's chart has probably, just probably the best guidebook about the battlefield. Her and Tom Vossler wrote it, and she smirked at us a little bit before she moved on.
That's probably because she heard my stupid questions.
Maybe. No, I think it was my stupid interpretation, sir. So I'm walking you back here for a reason, because, here we are at Devil's Den. We don't know when Devil's Den got its name. Local tradition says that Devil's Den is named that long before the Battle of Gettysburg, but we have no evidence of that. Now, there's a pervasive story talking about a snake. There are other stories about a raccoon den back in here and everything like that. A guy named DeGroff tangled with some raccoons and came out losing a great deal of blood. But the main stories from the local people seem to be about this 20 or 30-foot snake that would eat little kids for breakfast all the time, and they tried to rid the neighborhood of this terrible reptile, and they could never kill and capture him, so they figured he died here in his lair, and that's why this is known as Devil's Den. Honestly, I think it's called Devil's Den because every rocky area seems to have a name called Devil, Devil's Bath, Devil's Lake, Devil's Tower. It's always the rocks, and the local Germans here, the Pennsylvania Dutch, said that the devil put rocks in their field to punish them.
Oh yeah, we have the Devil's Cornfield, the Devil's Golf Course, a lot of devil stuff in Death Valley, specifically anywhere there's rocks.
Here at Gettysburg, by the way, we're right next to the Devil's Bath, we're at the Devil's Den, there's a Devil's Slipper, a Devil's Kitchen, so we've got no shortage of devils up here as well.
A lot of devils.
Now, the first local park historian said that people would go to the big rocks at Devil's Den, they'd see the Devil's Den sign and say, like, I guess I've been to Devil's Den, okay? But he says they haven't been within 50 yards of it. In fact, Devil's Den is a very small cave, hard to get into, under a ledge of rocks, which is why I'm taking you over here. According to this first historian, this isn't Devil's Den where the snake lived. That's Devil's Den.
Way back there.
Way back there, and you can crawl through it. I'm sure he's going to do it with this camera here.
I don't want to. Are there spiders in Devil's Den?
Well, there's probably snakes, man. I shame 8th graders into going in there all the time, and once a 300-pound miner said, I can get in and out of that, and he did. It comes out the other side, and there's one spot you can actually stand up in there. In any case, we have a lot of folklore at Gettysburg. There's one story, the guy who told the snake story said that Grandpa saw it and was badly frightened, and he said his great-grandfather used to talk to the Native Americans who were here, and they called the snake Heap Big Snake. So that just sounds a little too convenient for truth, but a good story nonetheless.
So the snake was the devil.
Yeah, supposedly. And there used to be a spring in here so he could drink water. The story could go that he would, slide in and kill little kids and cook them up in the kitchen and then chill out in Devil's Den. Take a bath afterward at the Devil's Bath.
So that's where the locals think the name came from.
Yeah, or at least one of the stories they told. The most pervasive stories involve snakes, okay? And it's from 20 to 30 feet, turning gray with age, had a capacious mouth that would swallow a dog. But my guess is there was a lot of big snakes here. Now, what we know is that there are 17 different species of snakes in this part of Pennsylvania. Oh. And I have seen like an 11-footer before, is the largest ones. They love the rocks here at Devil's Den. But even an 11-foot black snake tends to be about this big, not of the capacious sort that's going to swallow a dog. So I've got my eyes out for larger ones.
And there's multiple exits to this, right?
Yeah, there are 6 ways in and out of the den, but there's one main entrance you're looking at, and then there's one main way to come out.
I just see, I would normally crawl through a cave like this, no problem, but I see a lot of spider webs, and I'm afraid of the big snake. Okay, we're about to go up on top of Devil's Den, where I understand most of the fighting happened, to continue the story, but down here, this is the gully the Confederates were moving through, and they were trying to block, right? And so this is the slaughter pen.
Yeah.
And Gary's got stories of literally every rock on this battlefield. So what is the significance here?
I'll say that one time when I was writing the Devil's Den book in the 1990s, I had more time on my hands, and I stood on every larger rock at Devil's Den and sketched it from above, because we didn't have Google Earth then. Okay, so This is called the slaughter pen, and it was not overgrown like this. So imagine Alabama and Georgia troops trying to pick their way. They said it was more like Indian fighting than anything else they experienced here. And this would be a great place to just stop and be safe as well. Now, if you zoom forward 4 months after the battle, an enterprising photographer wanted to sell souvenirs when President Lincoln and half his cabinet and a bunch of governors were all coming here for this thing later known as the Gettysburg Address, okay? So this photographer went to a local hospital and managed to get some soldiers who were game, 8 of them, I believe, to pose around as dead on the rocks of Devil's Den. And this is one of the areas where he took his camera right up to this rock and recorded, and you can see enough of it, like this little shelf right here and a big rock up there. You can see these guys in this photo that will flash up on B-roll, just kind of laying there. There's a guy on top. The one thing that is like in the movie Airplane or otherwise, when people pretend to be dead, they don't look like the actual dead soldiers in photos. There's, so these guys are like, like all splayed out like that, like 10 of them on this rock, as if they're gonna all fall that way. And, also, if you look at this photo that we're showing you, you also notice there's no leaves on the trees.
Right.
And this is a summer battle, so this is clearly much later, but many people still take these to be real photos of dead.
I would have never known. I would have thought that was a real battlefield. And there were, obviously this field here, the slaughter pen, is probably named because there were many people down here who were actual dead. And that's interesting that they were actually staging photos after the fact to sell for souvenirs.
If I could be an old person in any way, and that is to satisfy the irresistible urge to give advice, one of them is to be skeptical of things you see on TV and on the internet today, and things from the past as well.
Question everything.
And if you're trying to sell something, the temptation to maybe do something either less ethical or true is too great for so many.
Can I just say really quick before we get up there, you just did a lot of backwards walking here. Clearly, you know this trail very, very well.
Here, by the way, we are at a Gettysburg movie scene. During the Gettysburg movie, this is the Ted Turner production. That, it's more than 4 hours long. Most of it was filmed off the battlefield because there's a lot of roads and monuments in the way. But they did film at Devil's Den, and if you look down in one scene after they captured Devil's Den, there's a Confederate soldier who hops down there and rests his rifle on that higher up boulder and goes like this. And then a Union soldier is shown flying off the top of Devil's Den.
That is so
like he just
cool.
shot that guy, and that's right over there too.
So it's not just staged souvenirs that they filmed over here. They filmed movies over here as well.
You have to study a historic site over time to really understand it. And I'll tell you, for a while in the 90s, after the movie came out, I was getting as many questions about the movie as I did about the history of what actually happened here. So, you do have to study a place over time, and there's no better place than Devil's Den at Gettysburg to tell a variety of stories, because, man, everything seems to be happening here to satisfy whether you're into agriculture, architecture, geology, fighting, photos, movies. You've got it all here.
Don't worry, I'll spare you the movie questions today, even though I love that movie. It's one of my favorite movies.
I love it too.
All right, so Little Round Top is off in the distance there. Remember, the Union line is going miles in that direction. Then way over here, the Confederates are coming down all the way into those distant trees here, and that is where they're attacking from, right? They're moving up this way towards Devil's Den.
Dude, I think you've just rendered me unnecessary. Well done, man. You do see that's Confederate territory over there. The distant tree line is Seminary and Warfield Ridge. These are troops under James Longstreet, specifically Hood's men from Georgia, Texas, Arkansas, and Alabama, and they're going to attack in this direction.
I feel surrounded already just looking out that way and seeing the ridge line is all the way around us.
You should feel that way, because at this point the Union line ends right about here, and you're seeing Confederates way over there. And in fact, there's a guy on Little Round Top, Gouverneur Kemble Warren, who sees the supposedly glistening of bayonets over there and knows they're about to be outflanked, and that's why he tries to get troops on Little Round Top.
That's where they are when he's going, we need troops up here now.
Correct. Okay. That's the actual quote. We need troops up here now. In any case, these troops are going to attack in this direction, and it is terrible, bloody fighting. In fact, what James Longstreet would later call the best 3 hours fighting ever done by any troops on any battlefield. And he said that despite an ultimate success. They never broke through the Union line. They never captured Little Round Top. And he said this was the best fighting. And this dude saw a lot of fights in Mexico and in the Civil War. So that means quite a bit. Now, these Confederates attacking in this direction, they split and they commingle, so they end up sort of all over the place. Some go up Big Round Top toward Little Round Top. Some end up here at Devil's Den. Some end up in the woods behind me. So there's just terrible fighting here, and it produces a lot of casualties, okay? There's going to be You know, thousands of casualties in this area, 1,800 casualties killed, wounded, captured, or missing in Devil's Den alone. And some of those casualties, as I mentioned, were actually photographed. Now, there was a young soldier who, for whatever reason, probably because he lingered longer, was mortally wounded and didn't die right away, who didn't succumb to putrefaction and decomposition the same way that some of all the other soldiers that were photographed did. So he was photographed 4 times because he looked like he could be your brother or son. So the photographers who came here on July 6th took 4 photos of him next to a boulder up there. We'll flash up some pictures of that, okay? And after those 4 photos, apparently the photographers walked up here, and according to William Frazanito, came upon the perfect position for a photo. Most Civil War photos were taken in 3D, and here are rocks, boulders, leading toward a center point with a stone wall and a little round top in the background, but no body.
Wow.
So in a flash of creative excitement, Frazanito says, discovered that they dragged him up here 72 yards on a blanket and brought him to this position and recorded 2 different photos of him here, okay? And one of them, called The Home of a Rebel Sharpshooter or Sharpshooter's Last Sleep, or Rocks Could Not Save Him, became one of the most famous photos of the Civil War. You see it here, and thousands of people come here every year and marvel at this scene, this stage scene with a photographer's prop for a gun, with a story made up about how he was a sharpshooter and he laid out his head to sort of await his death here. And he, you know, he did die here, but the story is made up. What we know about him is almost nothing other than that he was killed in the Battle of Gettysburg and that he was young, okay? Now, on my first trip here, and this isn't for everybody, I came upon this spot in 1988, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was already obsessed with this place, and I knew I was going to set up my camera, lay down in the spot, okay? And that was my way of getting closer to the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, this isn't for everybody.
Did you know that that photo was staged at the time?
I did. Even though I knew he was dragged here, I wanted to experience that. I wasn't trying to experience his last moments, but this was my way of getting closer to history, and this is the way I look at it. And as long as it's legal, you know, go ahead and interact with the battlefield the way you'd like. I just saw a jogger there. People recreate on battlefields. Veterans came and had fun on battlefields.
Right.
People have used, animals have used the battlefield as a bathroom for hundreds of years.
Right.
So to me,
because there must be sourpusses who come and they say you shouldn't be playing tetherball or whatever you're doing at the soccer in the field
and there
or
are
picnicking.
sometimes, I'm not a fan of the big, when there's 10,000 Harleys here for a convention,
Right.
and it just doesn't seem to fit. But people interact with the battlefield in different ways, and I have had as a tour guide people pass out, usually from heat, and lash out at me. They get angry, they get sad, they get happy, they don't want to deal with it. Every range of emotion. So in as much as that we are complex beings, I encourage people to legally engage with historic sites the way that they feel right about.
Yeah, I was worried about wearing a Ninja Turtle shirt to a place where so many people die, but then I realized the Ninja Turtles know a thing or two about fighting.
You're right about that, man. And they can fight in little, difficult places to get into.
Yes,
and
like
things
sewers and Devil's Den and that kind of stuff.
And let me just say real quick too that when I first came here too, it was my first trip. I didn't know exactly if I was allowed to wear a t-shirt. So on a hot day, I still wore a Madras polo. This was the 80s after all. So it was a Ralph Lauren Madras polo with t-shirt under it and Bermuda shorts. So
wow.
I feel,
so I'm all right. I'm all right in the shorts.
You're ahead of me.
Yeah, that's the thing. The battlefields are so interesting because if you start to get in the mindset, it can be very somber, very sobering and all that stuff. But I always say, it's the same thing with graveyards. Whenever I go to visit historic graves, I like to think that if I was in the grave, I'd want people to be enjoying life and living life around me and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, some people
different
are all
ways of looking at it.
Yeah,
but I asked you about this earlier. The photo here was staged, but this breastwork here, these rocks piled up, that was original. I mean, I'm sure they've been repiled as you're doing right now.
They have been, and you see the park comes in every few decades and they cement in and refix the wall, but maybe some of the original rocks are in it, but more likely not.
But there was breastworks here, and that is a perfect position to snipe up at Little Round Top from there. So likely there were dead soldiers right here in this area.
Certainly, but you have 4 wounded for every killed, so maybe somebody was hit here, maybe not. They have good protection, so there's a less of a chance than getting shot somewhere else. Let me say something, if I may, though, Justin, while we walk.
Yeah, you can say anything.
Okay, good, man. So what I would say is that after the fighting for Devil's Den, we haven't exactly tied it up yet, but let me just say it because it seemed appropriate for what you just brought up. After the fighting for Devil's Den, the Union constructs the stone walls you see up there now. That's probably when that wall was constructed as well. And there is for 22 hours into July 3rd.
Oh, the Confederates, you mean?
Well, both. The Union constructs walls on Little Round Top. Confederates construct walls and
Down here in
fortresses
Devil's
down
Den?
here and things like that.
Okay.
We only have one photographed, and it's that one. But there's going to be a lively sharpshooter action between them, 500 yards between here and the crest of Devil's Den, okay? While they're doing this, there's all sorts of stuff going on, and there's a lot of stories. Yankees talking about how they could catch their hat full of bullets if their hat could catch bullets. Fast forward into the late 1970s, and some of y'all will remember this, when Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat and Jimmy Carter came to Gettysburg when they were at Camp David, which is not far from here in the most distant mountains.
I did not know
we're
that.
We're near Camp David, so they came up here. What a better place, to talk about it. And the Secret Service on Little Round Top had heard the stories about Confederate sharpshooters picking off hapless Yankees on Little Round Top, and therefore posted Secret Service here at Devil's Den. Oh yeah.
Really?
Using history to inform your present. Pretty cool story.
Well, that is what history is for, I would say.
Yes.
That's amazing.
There you go.
Okay, so now we're up on top of Devil's Den. Devil's Den is back this way, and we're up on top of the hill. And I have to assume that these heights were the thing that were the most sought after.
Well, history would prove that Little Round Top's heights would be a better place to defend, as Dan Sickles would find out, because the Confederates are going to capture this position, lose it, and recapture it for good, at least on July 2nd, okay? But it is for the top of the hill that the fight for Devil's Den is fought, okay? And it overlaps with fighting in other places, the heat up at the wheat field and the fighting for Little Round Top, but there is a terrible fight right up here and in front of us at a place called the Triangle Field, where you have Texans and with Georgians behind them coming up through that field and New Yorkers charging down into them. The New Yorkers charge down, stymie the Confederates for a time, only to have Alabamians arrive on the end of their line called their flank. And if you shoot down someone's flank, you can't miss. Right. So being flanked is a terrible thing. And these guys are going to suffer more men killed than any other regiment at Devil's Den, including their colonel and their major and other people like that. It's a terrible fight, but it slows down the Confederates. Sometimes in the Civil War and in the military today, a good commander has to decide how much somebody's life is worth. And sometimes in the Civil War, it was 5 minutes or 10 minutes. That's what your life or your livelihood is worth.
That is crazy. And obviously they're fighting for the high positions because they want to get artillery up here and guns up here to shoot down. Well, you always want the high ground, right?
Yes.
If Anakin Skywalker taught us anything, it's all, you need the high ground.
He failed to have it. Obi-Wan was the one, it's over. And Anakin didn't learn that, right? I love bringing that into it, I know just about as much about Star Wars as I do about Civil War. It's my thing, and Star Wars is a civil war.
Yes.
The original movie, what are the first words of it? It is a time of civil war. So thank you for bringing that up.
So before we wrap up, what I was talking earlier about Sickles, he really should have been down there and sort of having Little Round Top defend it. He moved his line without orders or telling anyone, presumably. And so he was up here on this little knoll rather than up there on... you look at that and you think it's obvious,
Well, of course it is now.
Yeah.
Had his move proven to be the right move,
we would all say he was a genius.
We would all be talking about it. And it's a good way to wrap it up. Because remember, Sickles goes and moves out in front of Little Round Top like this. He forms what we now call Sickles Salient, okay? And Sickles Salient goes along the Emmitsburg Road. If their car comes, you'll be able to see one over there, okay? And then it bends back through these trees, through the wheat field, over here to Devil's Den, okay? So he's in front of it, right? But his line used to be this long, and now it's twice as long. He doesn't have enough men to man it, and General Meade will have to funnel 15,000 soldiers into Sickles' line to bail him out. And these guys had to come from somewhere else, places like Culp's Hill and the Union Center, that would create complete emergencies for the Union Army, okay? So Dan Sickles is doing this, okay? And eventually he's going to lose 40% casualties, his whole corps. And eventually the Union will be driven back or falling back to the line they'd initially established, okay? But Sickles lived longer than General Meade. Sickles lived longer than any other main corps commander here. And Sickles is that guy that you don't trust him. You might want to sit down and have a drink with him, and you don't want to be in a public fight with him. You've experienced people like this before. He's that guy. He's the ultimate PR man, and he outlives all the other major generals who are here. And his argument is one that would later be used by George W. Bush. He said, no, I blunted the attack out there so we didn't have to fight him on our main line. In short, when George W. Bush said it in 06 or something like that, or 04, we're fighting him over there so we don't have to fight them over there.
Right.
He said that about, you know, the Middle East and American soil. Sickles was doing the same thing, and I'll tell you what, it worked. It wasn't, the tide really didn't turn against Sickles until the 1960s or 70s.
Really?
It really worked. Living and telling stories is very effective.
Yeah.
You know, history is told and written by winners who live.
So they did battle here. They stalled a little bit so that we could get troops up on Little Round Top. I say we because I guess I'm a Yankee.
I'm a Yankee too.
And they do ultimately lose this hill here and lose Devil's Den. And so then what happens? Because there's still a whole other day of the battle. So to end, we should probably say what happened there. I never hear what happens on the third day down here.
I love doing the whole Battle of Gettysburg from my favorite place here at Devil's Den. So yes, the Confederates capture this. These guys are too worn out to attack Little Round Top. Little Round Top holds, but the Confederates had huge success this day. They're going to capture the peach orchard right away, rolling over Sickles salient. They're going to eventually capture the wheat field, and then some of those same soldiers on July 2nd who attack the wheat field go and try to attack Little Round Top from the north, okay?
Oh, wow.
Like sort of that way, but their attack looked like a wave on a beach, just being pushed up a little from behind. The Union has more reinforcements, push the Confederates back, okay?
Wow.
Later that night, there's fighting on Culp's Hill and East Cemetery Hill. That fighting on Culp's Hill where the Confederates make some gains, but not enough, because the next day in 7 hours of fighting, the Union is going to recapture their breastworks on Culp's Hill, okay? And that is before the famous attack now known as Pickett's Charge, where 12,500 Confederates are going to attack across an open field, break through part of the Union line, but the Union has simply more reinforcements coming than Pickett had in his whole charge. Pickett and all the Confederates did in all their charge. That will push the Confederates back. There's more artillery fighting, cavalry fighting, horsemen going on here, but make no mistake, Robert E. Lee, by the end of July 3rd, has been beaten like he's never been beaten before. In one attack in Pickett's Charge, he lost 23 battle flags, more than he'd lost in the entire war up to that point combined. The Union won a huge victory, and the Southerners are pushed back eventually into Virginia.
I guess there's no better place to end than with the end of the battle. And Gary, thank you so much.
Thanks,
this
Justin,
has been the most fun I've had in so long. This is like Disneyland for me. And I like Disneyland.
Dude, our first official video. I'm so happy.
I know you have a ton of stuff to do, but I just want to say before you go, where can people find your videos? Because if you think this video is good, you've done just hundreds and hundreds of videos all over the battlefield, from the tiniest spots and the cracks in the rocks to big overall things with animated maps and everything. So where can people find that?
The main place, first of all, go to battlefields.org. That's the American Battlefield Trust, to learn more about how to educate and inspire people about the Revolution to the Civil War, as well as to of course, preserve those battlefields. Then check out the American Battlefield Trust YouTube channel. We have 1,400 videos, just like Justin just described. And if you're really hurting, go to Garry Adelman's Civil War page on Facebook.
Oh, it's really good. If you use Facebook at all, you have to go there. But just real quick, too, before we go, what does the American Battlefield Trust do? Well, the most important thing I think you guys do is you buy places that were part of battlefields, and then what?
And that's, we purchase places only where they fought, from Civil War, War of 1812, and the Revolution, okay? Congress has established these boundaries. We know what the core battlefield is. We purchase those places. In a perfect world, we then restore them to what they look like at the time.
Right, so remove new buildings, remove all that kind of stuff.
And ideally transfer them to the federal government or a state entity who can then steward it. We want to save the battlefield.
There's pieces around Gettysburg that you guys have purchased, restored, and then given to the National Park System.
More than 1,000 acres of the 8,000 here, 8 or 9,000.
People can donate there, right? And support the Battlefield Trust?
Yes, they can.
Battlefields.org.
Correct.
Dude, I don't know if you guys could tell, but I thoroughly enjoyed that. Sounds weird to say when you're standing on a spot where so many men fought and died and gave their lives. I know it sounds weird to say something like that when you're standing on a battlefield where so many men fought and bled and gave their lives. But my favorite thing on the planet is to get hands-on or to get boots on the ground with history. Unfortunately, it's not always possible to visit every location, which is why I appreciate so much the work that Garry Adelman does, traveling around to all the historic battlefields in America, getting you hands-on with history, teaching you different stuff, pointing out some of the sites that some of us will never get to see. And it was a real treat, an honor, in fact, to have a little bit of his time and a little bit of a personal tour of some of the sites on the battlefield. When we were done filming, he drove me back to my hotel really quick so I could get the car. And although he might protest, I feel like it's safe to say he knows virtually every inch of this battlefield. So the whole ride, he's pointing out all these things I had never seen before. I've been to Gettysburg several times. I know more about the Battle of Gettysburg than probably the average person in America. But every time I come here, there's a new part of the battlefield I like to focus on, I like to learn about, and that's why I had never come to Devil's Den before, because it's a whole separate part from the elements of the battle that I had been researching before, and it was great to have Garry as our tour guide here discussing the important parts of the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, America's largest and bloodiest Civil War battlefield. Many would say the turning point in the Civil War, where the North finally got the upper hand and defeated the traitorous rebels. If you want to learn more, definitely check out the websites just mentioned for all of Garry's stuff, and support the Battlefield Trust, because they're the ones doing the hard work of preserving these places for generations so that people from all over the world can enjoy them, and our grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And if you enjoy my work and you want to help support that, you can go over to randomland.com. We have all the links there for social media and all that different stuff. Appreciate it if you would share this video, especially because we had such a special guest, and supporting the American Battlefield Trust is a very, very worthy cause, just like the cause of the Union, boys, just like the cause of the Union. We will be back with more adventures. Certainly we will be back to Gettysburg. It's one of my favorite places on earth. I always say, if I were to ever leave Southern California, I'd want to move here and have access to all of this on a regular basis. It's amazing. I'm so jealous of people who live on the eastern half of the United States that can come to these places. We didn't see a giant 30-foot snake. We didn't get to see the elephant and experience battles for ourselves here, but I had, and I hope you had, a lot of fun. And we've done our duty, so we can go home and sleep well. See you next time.